Hello once again, welcome to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marcus Botzer. Today I've got the great pleasure in welcoming back Mr. Jim Ferguson to Herd Immunity News. Jim is a former parliamentary candidate with the Brexit Party. He's an entrepreneur, a businessman, and he's the founder of Freedom Train International. But without further ado, let me say, are you well, sir?
I'm very well, Marcus, and even more well for being here with my old friend. How are you? That's great to be with you.
Well, you are going from strength to strength with the Freedom Train. The videos and interviews that you've put out are incredible. They're getting millions of views, and we're going to speak about some of those interviews today because there is so much information in them, Jim. In interviews that you've done with Dr. Schumacher, Dr. Thorpe, and Andrew Bridgen, former Conservative MP, now Independent. But if I could just start off, please, by talking about your Andrew Bridgen interview. It's got nearly 5 million views now. But if I can take a particular aspect of that incredible interview, and for anybody that hasn't seen it, we'll leave the links to that because you cannot miss this interview. There was a section in that interview where Andrew revealed to you that he had seen an unredacted version of the Pfizer contract with the South Africans. Now, this contract was about 6 months after the British government had signed it. And within that contract, it neither did it state that it had any long-term data to the effectiveness. And it also said it didn't know whether these vaccines would stop the spread or stop infection. Now, Boris obviously got caught out, as Andrew points out, misleading Parliament, part of the Ministerial Code in the United Kingdom. But last year, Rishi Sunak stood in the House of Parliament and said that these vaccines are both safe and effective. Have they got Rishi Sunak by the short and curlies?
Well, in that interview, Marcus, and it was a very interesting interview when I was discussing a lot of these things, he actually said that he had a copy of this unredacted South African contract, which I think he was referring to it because later on in the interview, I asked him about bringing people to justice and, what could the police do? And I think it's sort of, unbeknownst to me, he had actually been working on something and he revealed it live. Well, it wasn't a live recording in terms of it wasn't live streaming, but he revealed it during the live recording where he said that he had collated a large file of evidence which he was intending to present to the head of the Metropolitan Police. And of course, this unredacted copy of the Pfizer contract would have been forming part of it because of what the British government and other governments around the world had said about the vaccines, how they were safe and effective and how they stopped transmission and all these types of things. And he revealed that he had written a letter just a few days before this interview with him was taking place to the head of the Metropolitan Police, which is Sir Mark Rowley. Now, in that letter, which he went on to release as a public letter, he broadcast out the copy of the letter that he'd sent to him. He explained to Sir Mark Rowley that he had very serious concerns that there might be potential for criminal conduct at the highest levels of government. And of course, he reiterated that in the interview with me. And not just the British government, but the British civil service, the senior civil servants, who he felt had been going along with a lot of things that were, if they weren't borderline criminal behaviour, then they were very close to it, or potentially very, very serious criminal conduct, especially by those in positions of power in public office. So I was obviously very interested to hear that. We continued with the interview, and it was a very interesting interview. To my knowledge, and I've been in but regular contact with Andrew Bridgen, and to my knowledge, as of right now, Sir Mark Rowley has not responded to Andrew Bridgen, who is a sitting member of Parliament. Now, all that Andrew was really looking to do was to request, or what he did do, he requested a meeting with him and detectives. So he requested that he meet with Sir Mark Rowley, but he also wanted to meet with detectives. and in a facility, in a room that could maybe take 25, 30 people, because he wanted to take experts, witnesses with him and other people that had knowledge and evidence that they felt the police should be made aware of. So he really requested an audience with Sir Mark Rowley to present potential evidence or evidence of potential criminal activity by very senior members of the British government, including potentially Rishi Sunak, the sitting British Prime Minister. Now, the very fact that Sir Mark Rowley has not responded to that letter, I think in itself speaks volumes, Marcus, because all he wanted to do was present the evidence. He's not asking Sir Mark Rowley or the police to make a judgment in terms of who's guilty, who's not guilty. That's not their remit. But he wanted to present the evidence. The very fact that a serving member of Parliament would go to the length of writing a letter to the head of the Metropolitan Police requesting a meeting in order to present evidence of potential criminal conduct and then it being ignored is startling. Because if let's just say there was a conspiracy of silence and Sir Mark Rowley was in on the conspiracy, shall we say, the worst thing that they could do is to do what they've done. By ignoring it, he is putting up a great big red flag right above himself and painting a target on himself as well as being part of this corrupt system that is there. If they wanted to deflect and to sort of, play the game, as it were, he would have or should have had Andrew Bridgen in to present evidence to him. So it looks like either he is complicit, he is diverting, obfuscating, or indeed possibly even perverting the course of justice. And that in itself is a criminal offence as far as Sir Mark Rowley is concerned. So I don't know if he realises just what a can of worms he's opening up, because he himself could be then potentially accused of perverting the course of justice. Let's face it, he is a sitting member of the British Parliament, Andrew Bridgen. He has claimed to have evidence of very serious potential criminal conduct at the highest levels of the British government, including the civil service. He has copies of unredacted Pfizer documents. He wants to present that as evidence to the police, and the head of the Metropolitan Police is absolutely stony cold silent on his request. So I'm not sure what we're to make of that. But knowing Andrew and knowing the kind of person he is, he will not let that settle. And it's anyone's guess as to how that then proceeds. But it is potentially very serious for police to either deliberately ignore, or refuse to listen to, well presented evidence of very serious criminal conduct. And it does certainly give the impression that he's part of this system of corruption that's going on at the highest levels. Perhaps Sir Mark Rowley's been at Davos for lunch with Klaus Schwab. I mean, who knows what is going on anymore? I don't think we're getting told anything like the truth. Or perhaps pressure has been brought to bear, perhaps by those very ministers who are under the spotlight from Andrew Bridgen as to their conduct in the British government. Perhaps they didn't want any kind of investigation to go ahead, especially this close to a general election. So kicking the can down the road may be one option, but I think these claims are potentially so serious that whether he's in office or whether he's scampered back to India to his father-in-law, I don't think it's going to make much difference, because if there's any hint of it being true, these allegations are extremely serious and could be very problematic for Rishi Sunak and those that went along with the fraud.
It's quite incredible, Jim, that this is being swept under the carpet. One can only imagine that if this was evidence that Andrew had of, say, Islamophobia or homophobia, how quickly Mark Rowley would actually leap into action. But it can only be kept under cover and under wraps for so long. But another part of your incredible interview that we'll touch on, if that's okay, because there's so much to discuss in that. It can't be ignored. It was really jaw-dropping stuff. So congratulations to you for that. Amazing interview. But when Andrew actually shared with you that the World Health Organization leadership, namely Dr. Tedros, cannot be held accountable. He's unelected, unaccountable, and has diplomatic immunity. Basically, Jim, the man has a license to kill.
Well, yes, he does. And of course, it's important to point out that Dr. Tedros is not a medical doctor, but he is a member of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which was is a very violent terrorist organization. He was a full member of that, and there is very clear evidence to show that he is. The other interesting thing that he did say was also that the World Health Organization is funded to the tune of 86% of funding by none other than Bill Gates. So it's certainly not a bipartisan organization. It is the Gates. It's a front for the Gates Foundation. It's a front for Bill Gates. And he has total control over what is going on in the World Health Organization, which makes it incredibly important that our governments in our respective countries around the world do not cede control to the WHO, because they're basically giving Bill Gates, who's not a doctor, he's not a scientist, absolute control over every human being in every country and their medical status, their medical records potentially. But more importantly, if Bill Gates decides that he wants a pandemic declared, well, he's going to pick up the phone to Dr. Tedros and say, declare a pandemic. And if, of course, Tedros will do exactly as he's told, because he's not a leader in his own right. He is a patsy. He's a puppet of the Gates regime. And that's what will happen. And if that does indeed happen, and the different countries have ceded their sovereignty over to Bill Gates and the World Health Organization, and they declare a pandemic, well, they can perhaps then say, well, you're going to have to get vaccinated. We are declaring it mandatory that you get vaccinated. You won't work, you won't eat, you won't travel unless you are. And I suspect that the next time they won't be quite so nice about it. There won't be burgers and chips. There won't be lottery tickets. There won't be free drinks. There won't be free taxi rides. It'll be you do what we tell you, because they'll have that control mechanism that our own national governments have ceded to the World Health Organization and Bill Gates. I think we need to stop really talking about Dr. Tedros, because he is completely, he is a front man for Bill Gates. Bill Gates and the WHO are one and the same.
Absolutely. And we were going to come on to genocide. And Bill Gates is a great segue into genocide, if you don't mind me saying. Bill Gates's foundation with Melinda Gates has funded pharmaceutical products for the third world for a very long time now. And before that, Bill Gates's parents, as I'm sure you're aware, were part of the Planned Parenthood organization, an organization that in America, Jim, are responsible for the tens of millions of abortions. So to put this man in head of anything related to health, it's an act of either insanity or some very, very dark, nefarious plans for the global population moving forward.
Well, let's not forget, he was best friends with paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Saw an interesting clip of a video earlier on today, actually. I didn't post it, but I paid a bit of attention to it, where Melinda Gates has been interviewed, and she talked about how she had met Jeffrey Epstein, and she thought he was thoroughly despicable and an evil man, I think, in her own words. And the interviewer said, yes, well, it's interesting you say that, but it didn't stop your husband from having very close associations and long associations and trips to Epstein Island. And she immediately clammed up and said, well, you need to talk to Bill Gates about that. You need to talk to Bill about that. So once again, people that are involved in that type of activity, if that's who they're hanging out with, if that's where they like to spend their time, the likes of Epstein Island, those types of places, are those the kind of people that can be trusted to be in charge of global health? I don't think so.
Oh, absolutely. And the word genocide came up. Now, you're speaking with a member of parliament, a very respected member of parliament, not by his fellow parliamentarians. One only has to look at the chamber, Jim, when Andrew's given his incredible speeches. There's maybe 3 or 4 people around, which is an absolute disgrace, and it says it all about our demonic political class, or as I call them now, the traitor class, because the only thing that they can be viewed and judged as are traitors to the people. They're either one or two things, aren't they, Jim? They're either completely incompetent or they're in on it. In either way, the outcome is exactly the same for the British people.
There are some people in Parliament. I mean, I'm not going to start naming names, but there are some people in Parliament that are really stupid. I mean, they're really thick. And how they got in there? Well, they got in there on the party ticket because they were, they were Labour. They got voted in, because they were this or that, they got voted in. But there are, I would say, there's more people that are treacherous towards their own electorate, and I think that's the other thing. I mean, I'm sure that there are at least 100 MPs, and certainly on the Conservative side, who said they're not standing again.
Yeah.
But as I was discussing with Andrew and some other people just recently within the last couple of days, whether they resign from Parliament or not, they're not off the hook, because if this all blows up and it becomes evident that there has been criminal conduct and they voted because they were having shares in Pfizer or Moderna or whatever it was, well, there's no escape. They did it when they were in public office. They're going to have to pay the price. So there is no escape. They can step down from being in public office if they want, but their crimes will find them out and justice will be done wherever they go or wherever they try to escape to.
Certainly with people like yourself on their case and our smaller channel here, they're certainly not going to get any respite from us, because we know, I've known you for 5 years or so now, Jim, and I know you're someone that will not give up at all. Not just give up easily, but give up at all. But when we look at the Ministerial Code, just for a second, Section 7.1 of the Ministerial Code says that ministers must ensure that no conflict arises or could reasonably be perceived to arise between public duties and their private interests, financial or otherwise. Now, if we are to take the Ministerial Code seriously, as we did when Boris Johnson was ousted, I don't see how Sunak can get past this. We know he's going to be out of office very soon, and very conveniently. You've predicted this. He wants to be off the premises. He's got a green card. He will be given clemency and, if need be, a pardon, but perhaps not by President Trump, but you never know. So where is the Ministerial Code now? Section 7.1, conflict of interest. Where are we talking justice here?
Well, it's very interesting because there are clear conflicts of interest. It's a lot worse than that. I mean, Sir Geoffrey Younger, the former head of MI6, produced a clip talking about the National Security Act when he said it was now law. And I'm slightly paraphrasing when he said it, but he basically said that anybody who's in public office who is working in secret with a foreign power, using their knowledge or inside knowledge to benefit financially to the detriment or harm of the British people, is committing a criminal offence. Now, the laws exist to take Sunak apart, but the problem is that it goes back to people like Sir Mark Rowley. They're being told that there is evidence there of not just wrongdoing, not just conflicts of interest, but serious criminal activity. And he's refusing to grant an audience to a member of the British Parliament. I mean, if he'll do that to a sitting member of the British Parliament, do you think he's going to take anything that we have seriously on board? I don't think so. So they seem to think they've got it all wrapped up. They've got their pieces on the chessboard in position. Let's say that Mark Rowley is providing cover for Rishi Sunak and his criminal activity for some kind of financial gain. Well, I mean, what are we left to think of? I mean, what else are we to assume if he's not going to grant an audience to a sitting member of Parliament who wants to present evidence of potential serious criminal activity, and he's not listening to him or he's not giving him that audience? what are we to think? So, I think that there is a problem with the whole system, and there is high levels of corruption involved in the heart of the British government right now. And those members of Parliament that you're talking about, there are good people in Parliament. Andrew Bridgen is one. I can think of a few others, but they're few and far between. It seems like whenever you get elected into Parliament, the first thing you do is start making money for yourself, start taking on whatever interests you can find that generate income for you, regardless of the moral or the ethical problems that will then ensue from. So, when would justice be done? Well, I would have thought that members of the police, members of the security services, in particular MI5, which is the internal security, would have the wherewithal to look at what Rishi Sunak has done, not just with the amounts of money that was invested into a shell company or Theleme Partners in a notorious tax haven in the Cayman Islands, and then diverting not a couple of million, but $500 million into Moderna. A little while later, he then goes and gives £1 billion of taxpayer money to Moderna to set up further interests in the UK, knowing full well he was going to personally enrich himself. All the while, he stands up in Parliament and tells everybody the vaccines are safe and effective. You can trust me. I'm Rishi Sunak. And not just that, but Infosystems. His wife's involved in Infosystems, his father-in-law. Just within the last week or so, once again, Rishi Sunak's government have awarded massive contracts to them. And not long after he came into the position of British Prime Minister, he went and enabled his father-in-law, is an Indian billionaire, to once again get North Sea oil contracts set up. So there is a pattern of behavior that anybody that's in law enforcement or MI5 would see that pattern is there, would know that there was evidence there. Why are they not acting on it? Why is our police force not taking them to task? Why are the police ignoring requests by members of Parliament to present evidence? Well, I can only think that they're worried about what that evidence might lead to, because if they do allow evidence to be presented to them, well, they're going to have to then act in it, or they're going to have to dismiss it. So at the moment, he's sort of riding shotgun, I suppose, for the British Prime Minister, probably possibly in collusion with him, I don't know. But it's very interesting. But what it is doing is it's causing people to suddenly go, wait a minute, this isn't right. There is a serious conflict of interest here. Now, it's all very well, and Andrew Bridgen in that interview, he talked about the fact that Richie says, but I don't know what's in my blind trust. It's all set up and I have no idea how well it's performing. Well, that may be so, but you knew what you were doing when you invested $500 million into a company that at that point had no successful marketable products. Moderna had no successful marketable product when Rishi Sunak decided to invest $500 million in it. Now, unless you're completely free and loose with your money, and I don't think Rishi Sunak is, you're not going to invest $500 million in a company that has no previous track record unless you know something, unless you know something's going to happen that will cause that company to rise up and make potentially massive profits, which leads into the fact, was the whole COVID pandemic real or was it fabricated? And there we have it. This is where the chess pieces come in. This is where Bill Gates comes in. He wants to take over the World Health Organization. These people are all working together. And that's why Bill Gates is hanging out with so many politicians around the world. He's using his money and his influence to buy them. And as Andrew Bridgen also went on to say, there was a piece that was written about the American political establishment, where it was quite clear that you could buy a senator for $10,000, $10,000, and you could get a senator in your pocket. It doesn't sound that much when you're looking at the price of houses or cars these days, does it?
Very cheaply bought, very cheaply bought. Our British politicians would charge that for a day, as the Sun exposed when there were 5 or 6 MPs. Matt Hancock was one of them that came out and said they were available for 10,000 a day. I think Kwasi Kwarteng was one as well, who got caught with his trousers down, metaphorically speaking. But the power and influence that the pharmaceutical companies have over every function of government here and in the United States is absolutely phenomenal. And this comes by way of funding, marketing, and advertising. None of the organisations are going to say anything about it from the mainstream media, because the pharmaceutical tentacles, as you explored in your great interview with Andrew, have got their arms around every function of our government. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they go to great lengths to, get to know them, take them out, wine them, dine them, give donations to their pet causes in their own constituencies. And that whole system is, of course, by its very nature, prone to abuse and corruption. And when these perhaps members of parliament, when they start to accept that, they are getting sucked into an ever deeper spiral of corruption, because some of it's fairly borderline. It's fairly borderline, and if they start to, the further in they go, the harder it is for them to extricate themselves out of it. And before they know it, they're prone to things like blackmail. And then, of course, if they stay silent and they go even deeper, then it gets even worse. And that's how the whole system sucks these people in. And they can either stand against it, like Andrew did, and suffer the consequences and be ostracized and thrown out of the party and ridiculed and vilified. Or they can keep their mouths shut and just basically go along with it, which is, I think, probably what the majority of them actually do. And that goes back to your earlier point. Why is it there's only Andrew and maybe one or two others in there to hear debates about vaccine harms? It's because they don't want to draw the ire of the pharmaceutical companies, the big pharma, and those people in positions as ministers, who will then point the finger at them and say, hey, you're out of line here. What are you doing? And the other thing that Andrew did say was, of course, that when he does speak up or raise these issues in Parliament, these colleagues of his, or former colleagues of his in the Conservative Party, and indeed, I suppose, on the opposite benches as well, that their constituents would then get in contact with their own MPs and say, well, what's this all about? What's this about vaccine harms? What are you doing about it? Are they safe and effective? And of course, they don't want the hassle of it. They probably know that they're not safe and effective, but they daren't speak out about it, because if they do, their Moderna investing Prime Minister is not going to be very happy about it. They know the whole system is corrupt. Perhaps that's why over 100 of them have decided to step down. Maybe it's getting too hot for them to handle. But as I said earlier on, justice will find them.
Well, I hope it does, Jim. And they may be like the proverbial rats leaving the sinking ship. Certainly the Conservatives are doing that. And we saw that last year, really. It started where you get the likes of Dominic Raab falling on his sword. He could have stayed. He could have fought that, but he's got a job somewhere else now. There's so many boards of so many companies, a lot of them pharmaceutical or financial. We'd be quite happy to have these former Tory yes men and yes women on their ranks. I mean, we're even seeing a fudging in the, just to round up on your interview with Andrew and other research you've done, we're even seeing the Office of National Statistics are now fudging the figures so that the excess death totals that are unavoidable, they're right in front of our faces now, as so many people have pointed out. We're at 100,000 excess deaths that have been recorded in, say, the last 24 to 12 months. This is a higher death total than the Second World War, civilian casualties. So it's unavoidable now. More people will know someone who's died from the vaccine than they will who died from COVID-19.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, that was one of the things. In fact, I think it was one of the things I led into the interview with was the Office of National Statistics. And I said to him, in the way I see it, it's a bit of a cover-up. They're covering up. They're managing, manipulating the data to make it less obvious that the excess deaths are going completely off the charts.
Yeah.
I said, am I using too strong a word here when I say corruption? He says, no, it is corrupt. And it is in fact a cover-up. So once again, we're seeing corruption and the manipulation of data by a lot of people in the establishment, including now the ONS, Office of National Statistics, because they don't want the truth coming out. Well, why don't they want the truth coming out? Don't you think if you're in public service that you would want the truth, that you would want people to be to know exactly what's happened to them? I mean, the midazolam overuse, the care home deaths, all of that's a factor in all of this, which is what Andrew Bridgen wants to present to Sir Mark Rowley. Neither wonder they're running scared, because if all of that actually does come out, then the security services and the police will have to act. And what are they going to do? Are they not going to charge somebody simply because he's a prime minister? He's not above the law, you know.
Well, they may look away because you're talking about some very, very serious stuff here. You're talking about murder. You're talking about genocide, not just in this country, Jim, but in all of the countries, as we've seen, all the Western countries, the most vaccinated countries are the ones with the highest excess death. Israel, for example, Australia. These are normally healthy populations, but the levels of excess deaths that we're seeing in the younger cohorts, and these aren't from respiratory illnesses, which one may expect after respiratory virus like COVID. These are these are thrombosis. These are linked to the heart. They're linked to myocarditis. They're linked to all those particulates that you've done excellent work with Dr. Shoemaker and Dr. Thorpe, where they are coming out and agreeing with your assessment, Jim. And we're not saying this to be sensational, because this is pretty hard to swallow, but this is genocide and it's murder.
Well, I mean, I have my own opinions about things, and I respect other people who have their opinions. And these, you know, Dr. Chris Shoemaker from Toronto in Canada, he's been on the show quite a number of times, 7 or 8 times, I'm sure. He's also just coming on board with Freedom Train International to write particular articles and posts for our members. Dr. James Thorpe is another regular on the channel with me. He's a top doctor. And he, in fact, Dr. Thorpe, indeed, Dr. Shoemaker and Dr. Thorpe were both presenting evidence on different occasions to senators in the United States of America. So there are most definitely moves happening. And when I have had them on the channels at different times, I've asked them, you know, the excess deaths, the vaccine injuries, the myocarditis, the pericarditis, the blood clots, the spike proteins, the damage to people's organs, their immune systems. Could this be by accident? I mean, is this happening? Could it just be a terrible accident that these things have happened? And I have asked them both. They have categorically said, no, you can't possibly have these contaminants in, and the DNA in the vaccines and all of the other things that's in there by accident. And there is no good reason why you would even think about doing it. The only reason you would put those things in there is to cause harm.
Sure. Which
then led me to the other question is, well, do you think, doctors, that we are talking about an actual depopulation agenda? And they've both categorically said, yes, there is. You can't have any other way of thinking. And indeed, I asked Andrew Bridgen the same question.
Yeah, you did.
I talked about it and I said, Andrew, I know this is an extreme thing to say, but do you think there are people in our government, in governments around the world, billionaires that are using their money and their influence who actually believe in the darker elements of eugenics? Do you think there's a depopulation agenda? He said, well, it's hard not to. It's hard not to come to that conclusion. So, if doctors, top doctors, if British politicians and members of Parliament can start to think that, and we're thinking it, and a lot of other people out there are thinking it, then there's a high likelihood, Marcus, that is, in fact, a fact.
Absolutely. Once you eliminate all other possibilities and all other excuses and plausible deniability, I'll take one man, for example, Stanley Johnson, the father of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, is an author of a book called Virus. He's gone on the record on many different platforms, GB News being one of the most recent, where he said that the UK would be better off and run a lot better if we had 12 to 15 million people. Boris Johnson himself is on the record of saying that we have got a massive overpopulation problem. This goes back to the 1960s. I remember watching an interview with, I think it was Dr. Jonathan Harris with Enoch Powell on the David Frost show. And Harris talks about the worry that he has of antibiotics extending the life of Brits. He said this is going to lead to a tragic set of consequences for us because people are living past the age of 60. Now, to bring us up to speed today, you've got Matthew Parris. Matthew Parris, openly gay, conservative, and he is espousing, Jim, about the changes to be made in the law as far as euthanasia is concerned. And as we've seen in countries like Canada, the Netherlands, different parts of Europe, they're talking about in Australia, New Zealand, even people with mental health problems now, Jim, are being presented as candidates for an early death for this euthanasia program. Are we looking at these death occultists, or am I being sensational again?
No, you're being factual. You're being accurate. I mean, I was across in Ottawa. Well, I was across in the States for about 3 weeks on speaking engagements towards the end of, October last year, I think it was. Then came back to the UK, and about 10 days later, I was off to Ottawa. Now, I went round with people that I know in Canada around there, and I was shown things that shocked me. You can buy heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, pretty much anything you want on the streets, in the shops, on the corner of the street. And they're selling it openly. You can buy it. You can carry it around legally. And of course, it's leading to massive health problems. But don't worry, because Justin Trudeau, he's got the maid service, and he'll offer you state-assisted suicide. And they're trying to pass legislation. I don't think they've passed it yet. I could be wrong in that. I'll need to check with my Canadian friends. But they're trying to pass legislation there to enable the maid service to be offered to children as well. Can you imagine that? They're actually wanting to euthanize children now. Now, children go through all sorts of emotional, hormonal things when they're growing up. They get all sorts of crazy ideas. Well, don't worry. Justin Trudeau and the maid service are on hand. If you feel a little bit off colour, you feel that life's not worth living, you're a little bit depressed over your exams, don't you worry about it. Come with us, and we'll make your death an easy one.
Unbelievable.
And that's, of course. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Do you remember? I can't remember the name, but there's a film. There was a film a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, where they had this little implant in the back of your hand. It was like a little crystal, and when you got to, was it 30 or 40, it turned black or something. You had to then go and present yourself for execution. Your good life was over. Did you ever remember seeing that film?
Yeah, maybe I can't remember. Yeah, the name of it, but that does ring a bell. Yeah.
Well, maybe there'll be somebody can post what that was or what that film was in the comments. But basically, you got to a certain age, and then your life was done. You were no longer considered a viable citizen. You had served your purpose. And the lady that you were talking about in relation to Mr. Parris, that was on GB News talking about that, also talked about some other rather startling things, which was, I don't want to go too far off topic too quickly here, but she did talk about the fact that people were having their homes seized in order to be sold.
Suzanne Evans.
Exactly. Just going back ever so slightly, I mean, Stanley Johnson is a proponent of eugenics. There's no doubt about that. And you're quite right to call him out on it. Now, you got other billionaires like Elon Musk who say, hey, listen, we need more people. There's not too many people in the world at all. But then you get Bill Gates, you get these World Economic Forum types that talk about carbon is the problem. We've got to reduce the carbon. But you've got to understand the language that they use. Yes, you and I are the carbon they want to reduce. And when people suddenly realize what they're talking about, it's a little bit like the code that the Nazis used to use at the Nuremberg trials when they're being investigated and interrogated, when they said, well, it was the final solution. We were only carrying out the final solution. And of course, the Allied troops that were investigating this and interviewing them couldn't understand what they were talking about. What is this final solution? What is this reducing the carbon for the planet's sake all about? Well, that's what it is. It is the final solution. There is a genocide going on. There is a depopulation agenda. And I think there's many, many people in professional capacities that are now left with no doubt in their minds that is, in fact, what's actually happening. It's horrific.
Well, the West is in the sights of the globalists, and the United Kingdom, obviously, because we fought the Nazis in the Second World War, and we also detached ourselves from the European Union. The Brits are always right at the front of the fight for freedom. If you don't mind me saying, we've got a lot of American friends, of course, that are doing their bit over there. They're seeing their borders open to all and sundry. In the United Kingdom, the piece that we're talking about with Suzanne Evans on JB News was that people in the United Kingdom are actually being asked or booted out of their homes. They're being purchased by compulsory orders from the council. They have absolutely very little, they've really next to no legal rights sometimes if it's a compulsory purchase order. As we've seen with other projects such as HS2, you can be booted out your house, Jimmy, and there's really not a lot your lawyers can do about it. So on top of all those things, when we complain, because I want to get your views on this, the Hate Crime Public Order Bill 2021. Yes, Humza Yousaf has bestowed this upon our fellow Scots, our beloved Scots, and ourselves, of course, Jim, that even if someone anonymously chooses to be upset by something you've said because it's likely to cause offence to someone else, don't have to be named, you and I can now get a knock at the door. Is this some sort of 1930s Gestapo, a politicisation of the police force that we're seeing right now in Scotland?
Yeah, it is. And what the reason I think that's behind it, and it won't just stop at Scotland with Humza Yousaf. It will also, because I think that the way that the polling is looking, the Conservatives are potentially going to get a worse turnout, a worse result in terms of seats than they did when John Major lost. I think it was 97 when they went down to, was it 163 seats or something like that?
Sure.
They're reckoning that they might go down as far as 157. One other thing I will say before I go back onto your point there, with regards to Suzanne Evans, when she was talking about people having their homes seized and given to asylum seekers and potentially illegal migrants.
Sure.
She also said that if they decide that you're living in too big a house and you don't need it, well, they can downgrade you. They can say, "No, you're not going to stay there." And this could have maybe 4 or 5 bedrooms. Think of all the migrants, the asylum seekers we can get in here, and you're here all by yourself. So you're coming out, you're going to go into some little council house somewhere, and we're going to take your property and give it to somebody else who is there potentially illegally, that's got no affiliation to the country. Going back to your other point, I think that we are witnessing something. I think that 2024 could be a year that really upends everything. You know, a lot of people said about going back to normal again, that they wanted to go back to, I totally understand, I'm one of them, wanted to go back to the way things were in, before 2020. It's not going to happen. And when they talk about the new normal, they're serious about it. This is the new normal, except that actually it's going to get a lot worse. So, I mean, I don't like being depressing or talking about dark things all the time. And there is good things happening and there is hope.
Sure.
But what these globalists are doing is they're introducing legislation that is absolutely designed to put the fear of you talking about anything that goes against them. And it's incrementally that they will do it. So it will be on transgender or age-related or sexual orientation or whatever the classifications are. I think those 3 are certainly part of it.
Race.
And there's maybe another race and whatever the other things were. But they'll add to it. They'll put other things. So eventually you will have a whole gambit of things that you can't criticize. And guess what? They will probably make it illegal to criticize the Prime Minister or politicians. You know, there are some countries where that is actually the case. You can't criticize anybody in the government. You're not allowed to criticize anybody in Parliament. You're committing a criminal offence if you do. So once again, it's all about silencing the masses because they are, in fact, losing the information war, despite Bill Gates's billions and millions being given to newspapers like The Guardian and various others in advertising budgets, obviously. But, if he comes with £1 million in advertising, they're not going to turn it down, are they? They're not going to turn it away. And of course, they're not going to want to upset him. They're not going to. So they're getting bought over in that sense. The lying mainstream media, Sky News, they're really quite pathetic as well. You've got the BBC, which is probably even worse, but pretty much all of them are in that same vein, perhaps with the exception of GB News. I have to say, I do like GB News. They're not perfect. I think they've got their faults, but I do like a lot of the presenters on GB News, and at least with the likes of Suzanne Evans. I thought that was a very interesting interview with Mr. Christie that came on there. So they are in effect, preparing us or manipulating the law, putting these laws in place to stop people talking and raising criticisms about it. And usually when they do something like that, Marcus, it's because they're about to do something else that they know isn't going to be very welcome within the populations.
Well, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are people taking action. We don't condone it, but there's a group called the Blade Runners down in London that are ingenious people, brave, noble patriots. Obviously, you and I publicly won't condone any wrongdoings whatsoever, sir. We're both law-abiding chaps. But they're actually putting little bat homes on these lamps now, because when you put a little bat reserve, I know it sounds bat shit crazy, but when you put a little bit of bat, this is the ingenuity of the Brits. You've got to love us. You've really got to love us. So they're putting these little bat homes over the cameras, and they legally cannot be moved and cannot be touched. So there is ingenuity there. But just a little bit to go back on what you're saying about GB News, it's quite interesting that the idea of Boris Johnson was floated onto the channel. That sort of drifted away. And you get the likes of Neil Oliver, who is a fantastic orator, great speechwriter, and he is openly saying the same as us. He's saying that this is genocide. He said that these people are death occultists, right in front of the camera, getting away with it. Ofcom must be pulling their hair out, whatever they've got left. Because the sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, the head of Ofcom is a member of the World Economic Forum. and I pointed that out a while back. And of course, people sometimes don't realise how deep the infiltration goes. It doesn't just stop at the Prime Minister and his cabinet. I mean, it goes right throughout Parliament. Then it goes into the police, probably the security services, which is why they're not doing anything about Rishi Sunak, and then all the way down into business and industry and these other types of things like Ofcom, because Ofcom governs what people say in the media. So, of course, the World Economic Forum are going to want to have their man or woman in Ofcom with the big bat ready to smack Neil Oliver on the back of the head every time he speaks about genocide. But it seems to be losing. They seem to be losing the war nevertheless. They are indeed losing the information war. And that's why instead of in Davos, instead of talking about world peace or stopping war or any of these other things, no, their top priority, admittedly by themselves, was disinformation and misinformation, because they don't want anybody having a different narrative to them. And unfortunately, they've failed, which is why people like Thierry Breton in the European Commission is attacking X and Elon Musk so vigorously, because X is very much a free platform. I know it's not perfect. It's got, there's people that still think they're shadow banned, and maybe they are, I don't know. But there are still things that people can do on X that they couldn't even begin to think about. And just to quantify that, when I was covering the Israeli-Hamas conflict over a very, very intense weekend, I put out a post which went viral. It got to, I think it was 11 million views. Wow. In a fairly short space of time. And I put the same post onto Facebook and it got 11 views, not 11 million, 11 views. I kid you not. So Facebook's X, dead. 11 million. Yeah. Facebook is absolutely dead. I mean, I still put the odd post up to see if it will get seen by maybe one or two people, and it does. But I always live in hope that maybe Elon Musk will buy our Facebook as well. Who knows?
Well, I did an interview. Didn't get 11 million, but I did an interview with a controversial Italian lawyer, and it got 650,000 views. I put it on YouTube. It got 13.
That wouldn't be Mr. Giovanni by any chance,
it
was
would
it?
Be, yes, the devil's advocate himself, someone we've both interviewed. So there we have it.
He's a great guy. Please pass on my kindest regards to Mr. Giovanni when you see him.
I will do. Now, thank you very much indeed for doing this long form interview. But before we go today, if it's okay with you, I would just like to ask you about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Now, this looks to be all but over in name only, Jim. But I've never seen so many people now put away those Ukrainian flags if they ever had them in the first place. You still see the likes of Boris wearing it, Ian Duncan-Smith, the odious Tobias Elwood, Ben Wallace, Bet Shaps, characters like this. But I'm actually seeing so many people looking at President Putin and saying he's not that bad, actually. Now, I'm not saying I'm a Putin apologist or a Putin supporter, but have you recognized this as well, that more and more people are actually looking at people like Putin, President Putin, and they're saying, you know what, he's not our enemy. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. I mean, Vladimir Putin is ex-KGB. You know, and he came up through the ranks in the KGB. So the KGB had a feared reputation for doing what they did. And I mean, there are many intelligence services. The Mossad is one. MI6 is there. But you know, at the end of the day, Vladimir Putin is a very dangerous guy, but he's a very clever guy. But here's the thing: he's a great nationalist leader for Russian people. And he used to be a member of the World Economic Forum. You know, Klaus Schwab, there are interviews circulating on the internet where he's bragging about, you know, young global leaders like Vladimir Putin. So Vladimir Putin is his own man. He's a little bit like Donald Trump in that regard. He does what he wants to do. And you can't buy him. You can't intimidate him. You can't bully him. He is a fairly strong man in his own right. And what he did was, he learned all the dirty secrets of the World Economic Forum of what they were really planning. And basically, when they told him that he would have to sacrifice Mother Russia on the altar of globalism, he said, no, not doing that, turned and walked away and went back. And that's why they despise him so much. When they even hear the name Vladimir Putin, they're frothing at the mouth because they think he betrayed them. But he didn't. He just simply turned away and he looked after the Russian people. So yes, a lot of people talk about Vladimir Putin. I suppose it's like everything else. I'm a great believer in that if you're a national leader for Russia, you look after the Russian people.
Sure.
If you're a national leader in America, you put the American people first, or Canada, or the UK. But that's why I don't like the globalists, because that's not what they do. They betray their own people for their globalist friends, usually to do with money, corruption, blackmail, and all the other things that go with it. They are a really sinister bunch of people. They want a new world order that they control. Well, they might get something along the lines of what they're after, but they might not like it once they get it. And, you know, I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine, and it's pinned currently to my tweets. A fellow called Larry Alex Taunton. Yes. You would like him. You'd like him. He's a great guy. And I met Larry when I was over in the States, spent some time with him and his family. And, you know, we were talking about a few things to do with the globalists. And he came across quite a few of them. And he asked me a question. I was on his show and he said, do you think all these World Economic Forum types are actually evil? Do you think they're all really evil people? And I said, no, I don't think they are. I think it's a little bit like they want to be in the, you know, the cool kids club. You know, they want to be in with the popular guys, and they maybe think by being part of this they're going to get money, or they're going to make more money, or open up contacts. And yes, of course, the World Economic Forum allows all of that to happen because they know that will suck those types of people in. But then they start to identify the types, the Rishi Sunaks who will betray his own people for profit, the Trudeaus who get drunk on power and love to just put people's faces into it as he walks past hordes of Canadians, shouting and screaming and vilify him. He likes it because he's a narcissist. Those are the types of people that get identified within those circles. But I don't think that every single member of the World Economic Forum is evil. They're just very naive, and they will be fed on by those who are higher up the triangle. And I want you to imagine it. If you can imagine a triangle here, you've got the top point,
yes,
and then you've got you've got the top point, and then you've got the 2 points down here.
Yeah.
And right now, humanity is fighting a horizontal war where, it's gay against straight, black against white, old against young, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. Well, what we need to stop doing is looking at each other along these lines. That the war, the horizontal war, has to stop. We need to start looking up, because these are the guys that are basically shaking the proverbial ants nest. They are causing the quarrels and the fights down here on the horizontal. We need to start looking vertical. These are the enemy, not each other. We are far too divided as a society in every strata. And once we start to get that, our focus needs to be on them, not on the horizontal path.
Absolutely, Jim. And it's almost like the Battle of Rorke's Drift, where we have unbelievable odds and numbers against us. The attack is coming from 360 degrees. It's all over the place. And you see this in our society right now with the redactions of flags, songs, sayings, phrases, comedy performances. It's cultural genocide. Other people have called it cultural Marxism. It moves on to a soft, warm and fuzzy term called woke, which is vacuous. In my opinion, it's vague. It's actually comical. But when you're talking about taking away people's Christianity in this country, when you're talking about removing our sensibilities, if you don't want to live here and you don't like us, there's the airport. I'll drive you there if I've got time personally. But before I get your thoughts on that, just one final thing, because I've squeezed you to the limits here, sir. Donald Trump, you're a supporter quite openly and positively on Donald Trump. If he's given a fair run in this 2024 November the 5th of all dates, Jim, remember the 5th of November. If Donald Trump gets a fair election, can you see great change coming?
If he gets a fair election, he will win by a landslide. Absolutely no doubt about it. I don't believe that Joe Biden got more votes the last election than Obama did. I don't believe it. And I don't think many people believe it. So if they cheated once, they might cheat again. They may try to stop him. They may try, I'm very worried, and I've been worried about a long time that they may try to call out another pandemic. I'm very concerned, especially when we see the moves being made on national governments to cede sovereignty for pandemics and all the associated stuff, because they might say there needs to be another lockdown. And of course, people can't go and vote. Oh, well, don't worry, we'll do it by ballot. Yeah, I'll bet they will. Here's what I think. If once again, I go back to a conversation I had with Larry when he was actually at Davos. He infiltrated the WEF and he got in with Theresa May, the former British Prime Minister, and members of the European royalty. And he was talking quite freely to them because he walked in like he owned the place, and they actually thought he did. And I knew what he was going to do, and I said it'll probably work, and yes, it did. So that's the other way you do it is you tailgate somebody important, and you go in with an earpiece on, looking like your security, and that works usually very well too. So one of the things he said to me, because it was at the height of the German and the French farmers' protests, I said, do you think they're paying any attention? What are you hearing in terms of the World Economic Forum? Are they paying attention? Are they worried about it? He says, I don't think they are. He said, there is one thing, though, that they are desperately worried about, terrified of Donald Trump getting re-elected as president. And I think, you have to always look at what Donald Trump did in his first presidency and the kind of person he is. But the persecution that has come on him right throughout his first term and ever since has been relentless. I mean, I don't know how the guy manages. I mean, he's an incredible guy, and he's still going, and he's still battling, and he's still fighting. But can you imagine what he's going to do if he gets back into power? Can you imagine Do you think he's going to let the Clintons and Soros and Bill Gates and these other globalists off the hook? Well, I can't. I don't think he can afford to. He's going to have to shut them down. He's going to have to go after them with the full might of the legal system and the American military, and not just necessarily stop in the United States of America. He might have to liberate Canada, for example. He might have to, because there is a horrible CCP influence, and there are breaking scandals almost every day with stuff that's coming out about Canada. I've interviewed special forces and specialists, people who are veterans now from Canada, who told me things that would really make you question why on earth they would be doing that. Why would they take CCP, Chinese Communist Party soldiers, into top secret bases and order the generals to give them full access to all their files and all their intelligence?
Yeah, there's
something very seriously wrong there, and that's not been that has been noticed by people within the American establishment.
Well,
and I don't. Sorry, Indigo.
Just going to say, Jim, look at the funding of universities throughout the West. Look at the funding that the Cambridge, Oxford, St Andrews, Edinburgh. Look at the money that they're taking from the CCP. And all the time they're fighting with Russia. Russia are now doing great business with China. As a matter of fact, through the sanctions, the Russian economy is booming. And they're all booming, of course. Yeah. They're all booming, of course, because they're fueled on fossil fuels. They're fueled on coal, gas, oil, all the things that our traitor class are redacting away from us. I mean, to put it in a nutshell, Jim, the fifth columnists are running the place. Anything that they can do to make us resemble a conquered nation, whether it be taking a flag away, or traditions, or language, or culture, or weaponry, or police force, or army, they're doing it, and they're doing it at warp speed.
And they're doing it in Ireland as well. I mean, as you know, I was over there, and I had a great time there. I met some very, very interesting people while I was there. I was made very welcome by the people in Ireland, but I've never made any secret of the fact
that I waving your tricolour.
Well, I'm a patriot. I'm not Irish, but I do have Irish connections, and I'll wave anybody's flag if they're a patriot that's holding it or that gives it to me. And I like the Irish people; they're a great nation, but they're being destroyed systematically by globalists like Varadkar. And although he's out now, there's just appalling carnage within the Irish communities. They're going to have to stand up. And they're going to have to do it very quickly, and they are going to have to fight back, as we all will at some future point, because one of the things I do hope, if Trump, and I hope he gets elected, because actually if he doesn't, I think the world's lost, I'll be honest with you, in many respects. Trump's got to get back in there. And I think if he does, he's going to have to move to military tribunals, and he's going to have to see that justice is done. And I know that sounds harsh, but I think it's going to be necessary. That's my opinion, of course.
He's going to have to drain the swamp, absolutely, once and for all. And it is a very exciting time to be alive, as many people are saying right now. But as you allow your fantastic guest the final word, then it's only right that I allow you the final word, Mr. Ferguson. And maybe you can tell us a bit about your Freedom Train International as well.
Well, sure. First of all, I will say Freedom Train International is going to go to member-only content on the 8th of April. And it's doing that because we believe we have a good understanding through having very deep engagement with people in the networks that we've built over the last 14 months in the United States, in Canada, in Germany, France, Holland, the UK, of course, Australia, New Zealand, and indeed there's even people in Brazil that's showing an interest in what we're doing. So we're going to go to member-only content to give that deep level of information to people, how to prepare, what we think is coming next. There will be quite high-graded information coming in there to people, and what they can do with that information is prepare in their own areas and for what might be coming down the line. And I think we're going to see a lot of things coming down the line in 2024. We're in April. We're just at the beginning of April, but I think there's going to be a lot of things that's going to happen literally within weeks. I don't think we're not talking 6 months down the line or 18 months. Within weeks, we're going to be seeing things happening, okay? We talked about Russia. We talked about Ukraine. There's things going to happen. Now, the other thing I would say is that the reason that we did Freedom Train International was because we wanted to create a safety net if X goes down, if other social media platforms go down, and we can't be completely, purely public facing, we have to be a member-only platform so that people have to be a member to access the information. And there is a reason for that, because the globalists won't like what we're saying. They won't like what we're talking about. And they may decide to attack. So we have to be ready for that. The other thing I would say is what a fantastic channel you guys have. And I love the coverage of the Blade Runners. I love your coverage of what's going on in London. I love the London people. I had a long association, have a long association with London. My grandmother was born within the sound of the Bow Bells in London. Wow. So there's something you didn't know. There's another exclusive for you, Marcus. Yeah. And the amount of times I've been in the back of a taxi in London in a black cab, or wherever I've been going, usually black cab, and I get in and I keep on trying to pretend I'm a Cockney. All right, mate? Yeah.
That's pretty.
You say,
fooled me.
You know, I know I didn't, because it never fooled them. They're like, "Oh yeah, from London, are you?" I went, "Yeah, mate." I'm like, "No, you're not."
That's it, gigs. Well, you and I have had a few drinks in London, and hopefully we can catch up for another few drinks again, because 2024, as you correctly said, Jim, we've got the UK elections, we've got the American elections, you've got links with people like Ben Habib, who we've interviewed. You did a fantastic interview with him. But we've got all that to look forward to and all that to cover. But for now, all that remains for me to say is, Mr. Jim Ferguson, thank you very much for appearing on Herd Immunity News, sir. Well, it's my absolute pleasure. And then the people that will be watching, because I'll post this up on my platforms, give Marcus give him a follow, because he's a great guy. He's a friend of mine. And I don't have that many friends, Mark. It's not real ones, but you're certainly one of them. Well, Jim, thank you very much, sir. Take care. Thanks a lot. Just take care. Bye-bye for now. Great friend. Thank you. Bye-bye, sir.